Welcome everyone to this very special episode of IELTS speaking and improving communication for your speaking exam. I'm here with a very special person today, Esther, who is a speech specialist. She's in fact a speech therapist who is well known around the world. You might have seen her on YouTube, and she is the head of speakmoreclearly.com. And today we're going to talk about a few very important questions that students often ask about the IELTS speaking and how certain kinds of speaking elements like pronunciation, stammering, stuttering affect speaking scores. Esther, can you please introduce yourself in a few words?
Sure, Adrian. Thank you. My name's Esther. I'm a speech therapist, as Adrian said, and I work with adults for accent reduction, accent modification, and I've created some courses online courses so that people can change their accent or reduce their accent or get a British, Australian or American accent if they need to. It's up to them, whichever way they want to go. So yes, we've got those courses on speakmoreclearly.com. We also have other trainers who are all very highly trained to also help people in this area. Most of them are also speech pathologists, or they're highly trained in accent modification.
So when you have a moment, definitely go check out speakmoreclearly.com, and if it's the right fit for you, investigate, try it out, and definitely there's a great chance that it will help to improve your IELTS score, and it's a valuable investment of your time. I myself specialize in the IELTS exam. I have done that for more than 10 years now, and it's my goal to enable students for better communication as well as better English, and those two are not completely the same idea. So when we talk about English, we're talking about vocabulary and grammar of the language. However, when we talk about communication, it's more than just the vocabulary or grammar of a language. It also involves elements like pronunciation, word choice as well, expressive style, diction. So it's important to consider all of these, especially when going for those high band scores 7, 8, and 9 in the IELTS exam. At those levels, the examiners are looking for more than just a person who's speaking fluent English. In fact, band 6 is categorized as a fluent user of the English language. So, Esther, let's get right into it. I have a question. I'm curious, have you helped people who are preparing for the IELTS exam to improve their speaking?
Yes, I have. And it's interesting because I don't know if you find this, but sometimes we find that people come to us and say, oh, my English is really quite fluent, but I didn't realize that I had to also concentrate on actually being clear or changing or modifying my accent, let's say, to the degree that I'm clear. And I don't have to keep repeating myself, etc. So yes, I have helped people. And I think one element is, are you clear enough? Can you communicate well enough from that point of view? Inside of that, there is also not just how you articulate the sounds of English, because we're talking about English, but it's also about pausing and phrasing and rhythm and stress. All these things have to come in for you to be flowing and fluent to get that 7, 8, and 9. Do you find that too? Do you agree with that?
Yes, definitely. So the marking criteria for the IELTS speaking section are categorized as fluency and coherence, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy, and pronunciation. What I always found interesting is that they group coherence with fluency in the marking criteria, and in some sense that that makes sense. So that's understandable.
Yeah.
Because of course, if a person is not fluent, it's difficult to understand what they might be trying to say. However, at the same time, coherence is the top level domain. It's the encompassing criteria of all of the other elements. So a person doesn't just have to be fluent to be coherent. They also have to have good pronunciation. Lexical resource and grammar are also important for coherence as well. So definitely the IELTS exam is looking for more than just English. They're looking for English proficiency, and it is an English proficiency exam. Having said that, I would like to discuss with you, Esther, some of the most common worries that many IELTS candidates have going into their speaking interview. The first one I think we should talk about because it's maybe the most common. It's one that probably affects just about every single candidate, is anxiety. And that means simply being nervous for the speaking interview. And of course, when people speak to strangers, especially in an exam situation, it's understandable that they're going to be nervous. And we know that when people are nervous, their mouth dries up, they get dry mouth, they have difficulty thinking. So, Esther, what can IELTS candidates do to overcome the negative effects of anxiety on their speech during their speaking interview?
What I found working with the IELTS students is a few things. So one of them is to move your mouth more. So you'll have to actually practice this, because when we get nervous, we tend to, everything tightens up and then we don't feel as flowing, and then we don't feel as confident. So first of all, get used to moving your mouth more, so that when you actually are feeling anxious and things are a bit tighter, you don't start not pronouncing clearly or not speaking clearly. So that's one of them. How you practice that is, you know how you have to practice, or the students have to practice their topics for their speech. So while they're practicing that, every now and again they could spend 5 minutes, 2 minutes in front of a mirror and making sure that they're actually moving their mouth enough. And that ties in with modifying one's accent anyway, because I've often found, and I don't know if you've found this, you can tell me, but a lot of other languages besides English don't have to move their mouth as much. So for English, when we do ooh, our lips have to go forward, or we have to drop more, but a lot of languages, they tend to be more, don't have to open as much. So that's a trick to be clearer in English anyway, to move the mouth more. And you can overdo it in the mirror, practice over, so that when you're speaking at your normal speech rate, you are still moving your lips forward, your mouth open, your cheeks, your smile movement, whatever it is, enough. So the first thing I would say, do you find that the thing of moving the mouth enough?
That's a great tip, Esther. I've never actually phrased it in that way for my students, and I think that's a great tip. So thank you for sharing that. I have suggested to candidates that they should be melodramatic. English is quite an animated language, let's say.
Yes.
I have lived in Japan. I've studied Japanese. Japanese is a good example of a language that tends to be a lot more monotone or flatter in certain instances.
Yes.
And in English, it's common to be a bit more animated. Not quite as much as in Italian, but definitely it's one of the more animated languages. And being melodramatic is, I think, a good idea. And as you said, moving the mouth, that's such a great tip. Really just paying attention to that and being conscious of that, focusing on that. And not focusing so much on being nervous. Of course, the other tip I've given is imagine that the examiner is your grandmother or your grandfather. They love you, they care for you.
Yes.
You need to speak in full, clear sentences because they
That's
don't hear
right.
you that well. And that's what I've said, but that's quite a different take
Yeah.
for how to handle anxiety. So thank you for that professional advice.
Although that's a really good one about your grandmother or grandfather. And I do also say to people who are going into an exam situation that to take care of the listener. So if you move your mouth enough, if you do whatever you have to do, you're taking care of the listener. And that's the case in any situation where you want to communicate clearly anyway. So that could be added to grandma and grandpa. I think that's a good idea too. Yeah.
Sometimes I tell students, don't worry so much about the examiner because they are going to see many other candidates on that day as well. So again, I approach the situation more from the concept of course, psychology. However, I'm very excited to hear your input on handling anxiety as a speech therapist, and that was great. Do you have any other tips potentially on what can help anxiety?
Yeah. So breath control. If you think of an actor or a singer, they breathe from the abdomen where your belly button is, okay? And if what I often do is teach how to, if one puts one's hand on one's belly button at the moment and breathe so that you're pushing the belly button out. So you're breathing into that. You're not just pushing it out with the muscle, but you're breathing air into that area. You're actually giving yourself more. So as soon as you do that, your muscles relax. So that's what abdominal breathing does. Rather than we're just from here tightening up. So before you start the exam, you can do 3 or 4. Don't do too many, otherwise you'll get a light head. You'll get dizzy. But 3 or 4 of those sorts of breaths. Now, the other trick that singers and actors do is just what I just did. So I'm talking, and I've got my hand on my abdomen. Just, you have to practice it a little bit with that. And I quickly take a breath through my mouth, and that gives me enough air to keep going. First of all, it relaxes all the muscles. Second of all, if I have enough air, then that calms my whole system down and I don't have to sort of start tensing again. And if I learn to breathe quickly like that, then it allows me to keep going and flowing on in a way that I need. The other tip with the breath though is, and I find that again, a lot of people haven't quite understood this about English. We do pause a lot. So we group words together, which is where partly the melodramatic that I think partly you were talking about ties in. We group words together in phrases. So if there were commas there, but there aren't always commas, is where you would take a mini pause and breathe, yeah? But it's not just for the breath, it's for effect. And it's for pausing to allow the listener to take in what you're saying, because English is a language where we make meaning from pauses, from stress and de-stress, as opposed to just, I'm talking like this now and I'm going to keep talking like this. English listeners go, hang on, which bit do you want me to listen to? It's just all one wall of sound. So I'm going to the shops, I'm going to the store, and I'm meeting my friend, and I'm having a coffee, yeah, or whatever. But that's that pausing actually is okay. And if you practice that while you're practicing your topics for your IELTS speaking exam, it allows you time to relax. It allows the IELTS examiner time to take in what you're saying. And I'm not talking about pausing for 5 seconds. It's just a slight pause, which is what I just did.
About maybe like 1 to 2 seconds, would you say, for the pause?
Yeah. And it also gives you time to think. It's okay to think. you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a very good point that you've made, Esther, and it's one that I often reiterate to our viewers as well, especially with speaking part 2 of the IELTS speaking interview. Of course, speaking part 2 is the long part. It's the cue card where the candidate has to speak for 2 minutes on a topic uninterrupted by the examiner. And many students around the world have this false belief that they need to speak as quickly as possible without pausing, and they completely forget to look at their notes, they forget to look at the question card, and they just talk, often repeating the same idea over and over again. And of course, that just doesn't end well, and they don't get the scores that they had hoped for. And this is where I tell students, it's okay to pause, take a look at the card, look at the question, take a look at the notes, integrate those ideas rather than repeating ideas. 2 minutes is a lot of time in spoken language, and taking those pauses for emphasis, for grouping ideas is essential for that band 9 expert level communication, because expert communicators certainly do just what you said.
Yeah. And if they look at speakers who are presenting even in their own original language, they pause, they emphasize, they stress certain words. And that's the other thing about anxiety for the IELTS exam. Learning to stress the main meaning words is so important, because that's part of the presentation. Yeah. So if just
for our viewers, sorry to interject here, Esther, just for our viewers, I want to make it clear for everyone that when we're talking about stressing words, we're not talking about the same kind of stress that we're talking about for anxiety. It's a very different stress here. It's the actual emphasis of the words is what I'm doing right now.
Yes.
So that's the stress of sound. That's a good stress, to stress the words, to emphasize them. The bad stress is the nervous type of stress. So.
Thank you. Yes. Yes. So just as when I'm speaking to you or you're speaking to me, English emphasizes the words that give the main meaning. Okay. So again, if I take that example of going to the store, meeting my friend and having a coffee, then going store, meet friend, have coffee. The main words that are getting across the meaning are the ones that you emphasize. And this all adds to the 9 level of getting that higher score. But one more thing, and this may marry into your background as well, which is, of being educational psychology and as well as specialist in IELTS, mentally wearing the fact that you're speaking English. So stepping into it. Okay. So if I'm speaking another language, I mentally step into that language and I have to change the way I'm moving my mouth, change the rhythm of my jaw, all of that stuff to change how I'm speaking that language. But not only that, if I put on a British accent, I actually have to wear it. In other words, I have to step into it and be comfortable with speaking that language, how it is spoken, with its rhythm, with its
British.
emphasis.
You have to become British.
You have to be British. Mm-hmm. Or if I'm speaking with an American accent, I have to step into that. So stepping into English is also that it's a mental thing of not just, I'm just practicing while I'm in my room at home or with the IELTS tutor or with one of our, we have one-on-one coaching as well if somebody wants one-on-one immediate feedback for themselves, etc., and guidance. But it's literally that mental thing of, okay, this is a different language. I need to step into it. I need to wear it in inverted commas. So I think that's also another thing. Yeah.
I think that's a great point that you're making there. We, in some sense, become actors of that language and even actors of that culture.
Yes.
And in this sense, English is great because it's such a well-known culture globally through
Yes.
movies and media. So it's almost, for better lack of words, easier to step into English than a lot of other languages these days. So I think that's a great point, and I think the key there is to feel comfortable with that, and that takes practice. That needs to be done at home before the IELTS exam.
Yes.
So not just laughing at the fact that, oh, this is how a British person would say it or an American person, but actually taking it seriously and becoming that. Just like an actor, and sometimes we
Yes.
see this in movies where a British actor is hired to do a role that is American. And then we see that actor suddenly, of course, they have lots of specialized training from experts such as yourself, and they step into that role greatly. And it's almost impossible to actually differentiate the fact that they're not truly American English speakers because they really take on that role. So
Yep.
you have to be, yes, I agree with you. And I think that's a brilliant point that in the IELTS interview, it's a great idea to mentally accept the fact that for this 12 minutes, I'm an American,
Yes.
and I'm speaking American English to this examiner. I'm British and I'm speaking British English to this examiner.
Yes.
So I agree with you and to be comfortable with that and practicing that earns that comfort. So that's great.
Subscribe to our channel. Click over here. Watch another video. Click right up here. And click our IELTS Hero to join our premium package and get access to all of our videos, practice exams, and a fully interactive course.